Right. If you want to join me tonight, we're in Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs chapter 14. Proverbs 14. Now, I want to introduce you to what we're going to kind of do over the next 2 weeks, Lord willing, in the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs, obviously, it has a lot of various pithy wisdom statements. Like I said, the last few times we've gone over Proverbs, some of it lends itself to a narrative. Some of it lends itself to kind of a connected theme all through. And then there's other times where it's just hit. There's just all these different topics that are hit. And remember, as you go through the book of Proverbs, and this is where it gets fascinating. And in fact, I may have to dig into some of the parables as we go through this Proverbs study. Because as you look even at the parables, they exhibit a repeating pattern. And so they'll start here with a topic, and then they'll migrate down to this topic here, and the climax suddenly pivots, and then it rotates back to where it began. And you'll see that with the Proverbs, just kind of short little snippets where it'll have kind of a point and a counterpoint, main point, and it does that a lot. Some scholars call it a chiasm, some call it a ring composition. There's a bunch of names for it. But Jesus does this a lot in his parables, where he starts off with a topic, and then he goes boom, boom, boom. The climax hits right in the middle of the story, and then it rotates back. And it's just fascinating to kind of unpack these things. But you'll see that a lot here in Proverbs. And so, like I said, as we went and we started off this series months ago, I said, if you're ever confused on what Proverbs is trying to say, look at the next part of it, and typically it'll be a point and a reinforcement of the point, or it'll be a point and a counterpoint. And you'll be able to tell what it's doing there. But I want you to kind of understand that as we go through the book of Proverbs, it's meant to be very practical. It's meant to be very hands-on, if you will. Proverbs, again, it's proverbial. This is something that's meant to lodge in your head. And the reason I went and I grabbed this is a mortar and pestle. Okay, used in various shops. You know, if you ever have to have something ground up, I don't do it so much anymore, but you will still see this. And the idea is you put something in there that you need to grind up real hard, and you just start going at it. And it's a mortar and a pestle. And you'll see these things referenced in the scripture, where it's something every day that someone's going to see as they did their work and as they tried to do their job. And then what's happening is the illustration is there, sitting on your desk, and it's a little object lesson that sticks with you. Months ago, we walked through the city of Laodicea. We said what God is doing with the city of Laodicea is he's pulling all these illustrations that the people of Laodicea would understand. And he's saying, so the next time you go to get your eye salve, which Laodicea was known for, remember, buy the eye salve that works. Next time you go to the bank, make sure you're getting gold that doesn't perish. And what he's doing is he understands that we don't remember very well sometimes. Okay? I think we're all in that boat. I mean, there are times where I'm about to walk through the door. I'm like, I'm going to go do the thing. And then I'm like, what was I going to go do? I don't remember what I was going to go do. And we've all been in that boat where we've had that. But again, if you had a proverb built into an object that you use every single day, how much more would you remember that proverb? How much more would you remember, that's the thing. And so we've used a few illustrations as we go through. But today, what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks, Lord willing, is this week, I want to do a theme, and it's the idea of mind your own business. And it's the idea of look to yourself. Pay attention to what you need to pay attention to. Again, if you want to put a name to it, it's mind your own business. But then next week, it's the idea of correction, which means there are times where you have to mind someone else's business. And sometimes that's a good thing. And so if you're a parent or if you're a teacher or you're someone in authority, there are times where you have to correct, and we'll talk about that. But what I want to do is I want to take these two lessons. Again, we've just come off a mini-series on counsel, good counsel, bad counsel, how to receive counsel. And what I want to do tonight is I just want to take a few verses out of Proverbs 14 and a few other places in Proverbs, and I want to just build on that theme of mind your own business. Because there is a level, scripturally speaking, look to your own flocks. Pay attention to what you need to deal with. And I want to build that, but I want to balance the two lessons together, because I don't want you to get to the point where you say, okay, mind your own business, so don't you dare correct me. No, actually there is a place for correction. There is a place to correct others, there's a place to be corrected, and you need to receive correction. but I want to put these two themes back to back, because once you get the two of them, it balances out and you'll understand it more completely. So again, we're here in Proverbs chapter 14, and we are going to start off in verse number 1. And in Proverbs 14, verse 1, it says this. It says, "Every wise woman buildeth her house, but a foolish woman plucketh it down with her hands." All right? And so what I'm doing is I'm going to kind of read down through several of these verses, and we're going to unpack them. But I want you to see Proverbs 14, verse 1. It talks about this idea, and it says that a wise woman, and again, you'll see this throughout Scripture, this idea of a wise woman, lady wisdom, et cetera, et cetera. And it's saying lady wisdom is someone who is going to pay attention to her own house, and she's going to build up her own house. All right? Now, I don't use Facebook too much. I'll just be honest. About the only time I use Facebook is when I'm updating something church-related. Every now and then I wander and just kind of look at my friend's page. But I don't know if you've ever seen this, and I dealt with this a little bit today. I have a friend who runs a church on the East Coast. He had 3,500 people in attendance at his church this weekend. All right? He talks about the several services they had. I think he had a helicopter that dropped like 22,000 Easter eggs or something. I was like, wait, you're that type of church? Whoa, where'd you get a helicopter? You know, but again, what I've seen is just kind of standing back and watching him over the last few years is his church has grown by leaps and bounds. His church has prospered and it's flourished, and he's a strong defender of the King James, and he's a strong defender of the Scripture, and he's got the gospel. I mean, he's a solid conservative guy. He's not compromising. And God's blessed him. You know, and I look to that, and I'll be honest, I kind of go, oh, neat. You know, he talks about like, we had deacons appointed today. We appointed 14 deacons and their wives. And I'm like, 14? Wow. We have 3. You know, and it was one of those things, you know. But the struggle sometimes is you kind of start looking at that, and social media does this, where you start looking and you start kind of feeling a little bit of envy, and you're like, how come you got all that? Have you ever had that experience where you know, you look at someone else's business, or you look at someone else's relationships, or you look at someone else's whatever, and you start feeling that envy? You start feeling that like, I want that. How come I don't have that? You know, but what is Proverbs 14 saying? It's saying that every wise woman is going to be someone, and again, you don't have to limit it just to women. Proverbs uses wisdom as proverbial. But again, it's saying here, every wise woman is going to be the one who builds her own house. But look at the contrast here. A wise woman is going to build her own house. She's going to pay attention to what she needs to pay attention to. She's not going to be envious of a neighbor. She's not going to be, I wish I had that. No, what is it? A wise woman is going to build her own house, but what? But a foolish woman, what? She plucketh it down with her hands. Little by little tear, little browbeating, little whatever. And slowly the house gets disassembled. I was watching the kids today. I passed out on the couch, and when I got up, they had built this giant, I don't know if you've seen those magnetic blocks. And they're little squares about that big, and they have magnets on 4 sides. And you build these awesome things. I mean, I built a tower that goes all the way to the ceiling before. They're really, really cool, and they hold up really well. And so you build this thing, and so I get up off the couch, and I look, and there's this massive fortress of magnets. And it's this big by this big, and it's got an inner part. I was like, somebody did a whole ton of work here. This is crazy. Like, this is really cool. Well, promptly, one of my kids came up with his new little spinny ball on a rope thing, and he was just like, rah! And he just nailed it and just like collapsed part of it, and then he launches it in and gives it a pull and pulls down another chunk of it and smacks the piece. I mean, it was chaos. I mean, it looked, you know, the barbarians had arrived at the gates of Rome. I mean, he just absolutely devastated this building. But what was he doing? He saw no value to the building being as it was, and so what did he do? He came up, and for the fun of it, or just to see what would happen, or maybe it didn't belong to him and he wanted to take it out on it, whatever. Fill in the blank with why he did it. Doesn't matter. He tore it to pieces and sent the pieces everywhere. How does that apply to us? Well, think about this. Every wise woman is going to build her house. It takes a lot of work to build a house. It takes a lot of work to bend down, to put that together, to plan it out, to put it up. It takes work, and sometimes work is hard. And look what it says, but a foolish woman is going to be someone who plucks it down piece by piece. And so what do we see in here? Look to yourself. What logical sense does it make to tear down your own house? Now fill in the blank with your own house, your own business, your own marriage, your own family, whatever it is. Why would you tear down your own whatever? Well, sometimes it's easier to. Sometimes it's hard to build up. Sometimes it's easier just to pluck down. Might as well just go for broke, might as well burn this thing to the ground. What difference does it make? But the Bible here is saying that if you're a wise person, a wise woman, you're going to be someone who does the hard work and you build up the thing that matters, which is your own house. Now, the reason I bring it up is because, like I said, we can get on social media, or we can get around our friends, or we can start realizing, oh, you have such a better life than I do. And it's like, no, dude, they don't. They have such a better life that they show you. But we need to understand that we need to have the wisdom to build up our own things. And so that's the first point here. Now again, you hop a little farther down in the book of Proverbs. It says, he that walketh with uprightness feareth the Lord, but he that is perverse in his ways despiseth him. There's a lot of side comments about various topics. But again, what we're doing tonight is we're zooming in on this idea of mind your own business. Pay attention to the things that matter most to you. So the first thing is to build up your own house. Don't be the type who would tear down your own house. Don't be the type who would be envious of what someone else has, and because you're so envious of that, you would destroy what you have. It would make no sense. Think about it like this, the illustration I gave. It would make no sense for me to be envious of my friend's church to then turn around and destroy this one. I mean, what reason, what logical reason, how does that make sense? But I think sometimes we do that with our own lives, where we come and we say, I want what they have, and I'm going to sacrifice what I have to get what they have. That's not the way it works. And so Proverbs 14, verse 1, every wise woman buildeth her own house, but the foolish plucketh it down. The next one we see is when we hop down to Proverbs 14, verse 10. This one's interesting, because look what it says, Proverbs 14, verse 10. The heart knoweth his own bitterness, and a stranger doth not intermeddle with his joy. Well, that's interesting. The heart knoweth its own bitterness. Here's the thing. Enjoy your own things. If God gives you the ability, and you'll see this through Ecclesiastes and elsewhere, if God has given you the ability to enjoy what you have, enjoy it. You know your own bitterness, you know the own struggles, but again, what is this doing? It's the idea of not being envious of what someone else has. Enjoy what you have. You'll see this in the scripture where it talks about live with the wife of your youth, be delighting in her, and what is that doing? It's reminding you to stick with what you have. Don't be looking for something else. I want to look at a few other passages that kind of speak to this. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. You don't have to turn there, but if you want to, it's there. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. It's going to say this in verse 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12. We'll lead into it a little bit. Paul is writing, and he says this, that I may not seem as I would terrify you by letters. And so he's writing to the Corinthian church, and he's just reminding them, when I was with you in person, I was a lot more gentle, but my letters are pretty fierce. And he's just saying, I'm not trying to go out of my way to destroy you. And it says, verse 10, for his letters, say they, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is contemptible. It's interesting that you think about Paul, and I don't know if you've ever heard a preacher that was just absolutely atrocious when they preached. That was Paul. He basically is saying, now maybe he wasn't, maybe this is just what they were saying about him, but he's saying he is this frail guy, because think about how many times he was beaten nearly to death. It probably had a physical effect on him. So here's this guy who physically is not intimidating. Verbally, when he speaks, he's not intimidating. But he said, my letters are powerful. When I write, he could write like nobody's business, but physically, he was just emaciated. And he says this, verse 10, for his letters, say they, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, and his speech is contemptible. Let such an one think this, that such as we are in the word by letters when we are absent, such will we be also indeed when we are present. So he's saying, you think my letters are harsh, wait until I show up in person if you don't take care of this. So he's getting a little fierce. But look at what he says, verse 12. For we dare not make ourselves of the number, or compare ourselves with those that commend themselves. And so look what he says. But they, measuring themselves, what? By themselves, and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. And so he says, if you're someone who all of your value is built on how you compare to other people, he says, that's just unwise. That doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? He's like, I'm not that type of person. I really don't care what you have to say about me. I care about what God has to say. And you can compare me back and forth all you want. I'm not playing that game. He says, if you are someone who compares yourself by someone else and compares yourself among someone else, well, you're not wise. And he says this, but we will not boast of things without our measure, but according to the measure of the rule which God hath distributed to us, a measure to reach even unto you. For we stretch not ourselves beyond our measure, as though we reach not unto you, for we are come as far as you also in preaching the gospel of Christ. Not boasting of things without our measure, that is, of other men's labors, but having hope that when your faith is increased, that you shall be enlarged by, that we shall be enlarged by you, according to this rule abundantly. And he says, here's the focus, to preach the gospel in regions beyond you, and not to boast in another man's line of things which was already made ready to our hands. But he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord. For not he that commendeth himself is approved, but what? But he who the Lord commendeth. And so what are we saying? It's saying, mind your own business. Mind your own things. Like, pay attention to what God has given you to do. Pay attention to what God has put in your hands to do. Again, you'll see this elsewhere, but we're moving our way through these things. So first thing we see is when we pay attention to our own business, we're going to build our own house. When we pay attention to our own business, we're not going to be the type who is finding our identity and our joy in just what someone else does. We're looking to our own things here. But then I want you to hop forward a few verses to Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12. Proverbs 14, verse 12, and what I want to do is I want to look through a few of these verses here. Proverbs 14, verse 12, it says this, there is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Even in laughter the heart is sorrowful, and the end of that mirth is heaviness. The backslider in heart shall be filled with his own ways, and a good man shall be satisfied from himself. And so what do we see in here? Right here, so we've seen first of all that a wise woman, specifically in the verse, is going to build her own house. We're going to see the idea of you're not going to find your joy in other things. You're going to wait for God to commend you. But what do you see here? With all of that in our mind, we make sure that our paths are going in the direction God has commanded. We're making sure we are walking in the path that God has laid out. And so to go back to my illustration of my friend who pastors a church on the East Coast. God has not called me to that path. He's not called me to do that type of thing. It's like the talents. A guy goes into a far country, he gives talents to various people, and he gives to this guy 1, and this guy 5, this guy 10, and he says, hey, occupy till I come. He says, hey, you are showing your loyalty to me by simply staying here and pledging your loyalty to me. And in that case, for some of you, you're going to prosper like crazy. Some of you, you're going to prosper a little bit. Some of you, well, you don't get as much. And what does he do? He praises the ones that are just simply faithful. What does that guy with the 1 do? He takes it, puts it up in a napkin, tucks it away. He's like, I'm not going to show I'm not. And he comes and he goes, why didn't you do anything with it? And so God just simply says, I've given you a talent. I've given you whatever it is. Be faithful to what I've called you to do. And that's where, as you look through these passages, there is a way that seemeth right unto the man, but what? The end thereof is the way of death. Make sure that the path that you're walking on is the path that is right. Make sure it's a righteous path. And again, you don't have to go far in Scripture to figure out what God thinks on things. I think about this, like, I've known, like I said, I've known a lot of businessmen, and I've worked in a lot of various aspects of ministry and business. And there are times where I've been privy to things that people have done. And I look and I go, you lied in that report. You lied in the way that you presented that information. Do you have to go too far in Scripture to figure out what God thinks about lying? Now, is it good business sense sometimes to lie? Business-wise, maybe. Morally, no. And so if you look, there are times where, remember, we talked about good and bad counselors. There's times where this counsel will work from a human standpoint, but we have to make sure that we're on the path of life. We have to make sure we're following what God has laid out for us, because he says here, there are paths that we could walk down that look right, because they look like they get us to a successful end. And he's trying to remind us, make sure you're doing it God's way. Doing it God's way, doing it in God's timing. It's dangerous to go the other way. And we don't really, like I said, we don't have to go far in Scripture to figure out what the right answer is to these things. But sometimes it takes that concern to say, I need to pull myself back on this one. And so you'll see here it says, there is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof is the way of death. Even in laughter, the heart is sorrowful. What does that mean? Well, again, have you ever heard the stories of celebrities who commit suicide? I mean, I remember I was working at a camp one time back in New Hampshire, and it was when Robin Williams killed himself. And I think about it, every time I go into San Francisco, you drive through the Robin Williams Tunnel. You know, I'm sure most of us are familiar with that. Robin Williams, the comedian that made everybody laugh, made everybody like him. And somehow, though he had it all, though he's successful in all the ways, I mean, he has a tunnel named after, I mean, his name is legendary. And what happens? He looks and he says, it's just not satisfying. It's not, this path is not the right path. And he realizes that what he's been living for is not right, and he committed suicide. And I find that because as you look into Ecclesiastes is Solomon looking through all of his accomplishments in life and going, what is the point of all this? I've got buildings, and I've got servants, and I've got all this stuff that you could ever imagine. I'm the smartest man, the wisest man, the most successful man. And he goes, what's the point of it all? I'm going to die, and nobody's going to care. I mean, think about it. Like, where are those fountains that Solomon built? And where are those gardens that Solomon planted? Like, other than in the Bible, we have very little that brings up Solomon's name. And Solomon gets frustrated by this because he realized, I'm not living for the right thing. And he despairs of his life, and he goes, what's the point of it all? And that's where this idea where it says, there is a way that seems right. There's a way that, it makes sense on paper, but he says, it doesn't satisfy the heart. It's not, I'm not living for the right thing. And that hesitation, that pause, that thought of what is the point of my life is a good thought, because what it's doing is it's getting us to stop and go, what am I doing? I'll use this illustration. We've all used GPSs. There was a time I was driving, and this was back before I taught there, so I didn't know how to get there. But I was going to preach chapel at Wilton, over in Wilton. And I was driving, and I'm driving on 80, and I don't know how to get there. I just know that I'm looking for Dillard Road. And so I'm driving along, and I fire up my GPS, and I'm following the GPS going, okay, this is where I'm supposed to go, cool. And I know that I'm going to be on 80 forever. And so I tuned my thing away from my GPS, tuned it to the radio, and I'm just cruising along. And so I hop on the road that I'm supposed to go, and I'm driving and driving and driving. And I had been there before, so I knew roughly about how much time it should take to get there. But as I'm driving, I go, man, the GPS should, it should be telling me something. And I realize, I'm like, something's off. It's been too long. Like, I've driven an hour and a half. It should have taken me an hour and 15. Like, something's off here. And so I pick up my GPS, and I'm driving. I look at it, and I go, oh, it's the next turn. Okay, what had happened was I had fired up the GPS, and the GPS was trying to tell me to turn the whole time, but I wasn't listening to it because I tuned to something else. And so meanwhile, the GPS is sitting in the passenger seat, screaming at me, take the next right, take the next right. Okay, go 4 miles up, take that right. Go 2 miles up, take the next right. Hey, go the next mile up. I couldn't hear it because I wasn't listening. I wasn't tuned into it anymore. And it took me about 15 minutes out of the way because I realized the GPS was trying to tell me the right answer, but I wasn't ready to answer it because I wasn't listening. And it took me off this next road, looped me back. I was like half an hour late. Thankfully, I had left like an hour early, so I still got there early. But I did not have nearly as much time as I thought I would because I wasn't listening to the GPS. And I think what happens with a lot of people is when you start looking and you're saying, I'm going to measure my value by this standard, that standard, that standard, that standard. There's laughter on the face, but there's sorrow in the heart. The path is leading here, but it's to the path of death, and they're not even tuned in to hear it right. And you get to some of these celebrities who make it to the end of their life, and they go, I had the fame, and I had the success, and I had everything you could ever want. And it was all for nothing because it didn't bring the satisfaction I thought it would have. And they look at it, instead of turning around and making a difference, they go, I'm just going to take myself out. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Turn around. And just as I'm driving down that highway and it says take that off ramp, and yes, it's going to be 20 minutes out of the way, you wasted time and gas, turn around. It would make no sense for me to go, well, I'm done, and just swerve off the road and just stop driving. It makes no sense to do that. And that's why we start off with Proverbs 14, verse 1, because what it's doing is it's saying every wise woman is going to be what? She's going to be building up her own house. It's really easy to despair at the end and say, I'm just tearing this all down. I'm done. I'm just burning this on my way out. But he says, no, no, no. You build that house. You pay attention to it. You mind your own things. You build that house. Yes, your heart knows your own bitterness, but make sure you're following what God has asked you to do. You then follow down, like I said, make sure your path is the right path. But then, we're going to come right back around here, and I want you to look at Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27, and while you're turning there, I'll read Proverbs 14:28, and it says this, in the multitude of people is the king's honor, but in the want of people is the destruction of the prince. And the idea is, as you build it out, verse 29, he that is slow in wrath is of great understanding, but he that is hasty in spirit exalteth folly. A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy is the rottenness of the bones. He that oppresseth the poor reproacheth his maker, but he that honoreth him has mercy on the poor. The wicked is driven away in his wickedness, but the righteous hath hope in his death. And it's talking about this king who's ruling well and doing what he's supposed to do, and again, the danger that comes with that rulership. But I want you to look at it because Proverbs 27 is kind of another way of saying this. And Proverbs 27, verse 23, look what it says here. It says, verse 22, this is why I brought the mortar and pestle, because it's fun. It says, though thou shouldest bray the fool in a mortar among the wheat with a pestle, yet you will not drive the foolishness will not depart from him. And so basically what God is saying about the foolish man is, though you beat him and beat him and beat him with a mortar and pestle, you get that foolish man in there and you're just pummeling him, the foolishness won't leave him. And so it's just kind of an interesting little image there. But if you look at the next verse, it says this, verse 23, be thou diligent to know the state of thy flocks, and look well to thy herds, for riches are not forever, and doth the crown endure to every generation? And so look what he's saying. He's saying, mind your own things. Pay attention to your own business. If you are someone who has people under your authority, under your care, if you're a teacher or a parent or someone who's caring, or even you're just dealing with your own stuff, it says, be diligent to know the state of your flocks. Think about all the things that we are responsible for, whether it be our marriage, whether it be our family, whether it be our vehicles, whether it be our house, whatever it is, fill in the blank. Be diligent to know the state of your flocks. And look well to what? Your herds. This is where it's important. Like I said, the whole theme tonight is the idea of pay attention to your own business. And so you build up your own house. You're not looking to what other people are doing. You're paying attention to what God has asked you to do. But even here, you look well to the state of your herds. Here's another passage in Proverbs 12. You don't have to turn there. But Proverbs chapter 12, verse 10 says this, a righteous man regardeth the life of his beast. Now, when I was a kid, I remembered this verse. And I remember I was at a campfire, and there were other boys who were taking the legs off of a daddy long leg and throwing it in the fire. And I was like, hey guys, come on, a wise man takes care of the beasts of his field. Okay, that's not exactly what that verse is referencing. Now, I was trying to save a spider, which some of you find weird, but I like, they're okay, as long as they're not on me. But what is this verse trying to say? It's saying, hey, are you someone with a field of cattle? Most of us, no. Fill in the blank with what it is that you take care of. The righteous man is going to be someone who considers the life of his beasts. Why? Because he benefits from them. Think about it. If you don't take care of what is yours, what happens to it? It goes away, falls apart, crumbles. It's like, remember we did the sermon months ago on slothfulness. And I use the illustration of the barn that's collapsing in. And what was the point of that illustration? It's so when you drive by and you look at the field of the slothful man, that barn is collapsing in. And I asked this question, did that happen in a day? No. That happened over a long period of time. It was that beam started to sag, and it's not a big deal. We're not going to deal with it. And then that support gave way. We're not going to deal with that. And then that wall started to lean in a little bit. We're not going to deal with that. And over time, what happens when you choose not to deal with the things that are yours? They eventually give in. And now, that beautiful barn that someone took the time to build and shape, and it's collapsed. And that's why the Bible will say things like, be diligent to know the state of your herds. Hey, a righteous man's going to consider what? The life of his beast. Something as simple as an animal, he's going to say, no, I'm going to take care of that animal. Because he understands that it's all these little things that build up. And so, again, as we unpack all of these, like I said, this is part of kind of a two-part series. This is the idea of look diligently to what God has put in your control. If God has given you responsibilities, if God has given you children, if God has given you ministry, whatever it is, take diligent care of it, and you don't weigh your value based on what other people are doing. You weigh it based on what God has led you to do. Next week, Lord willing, like I said, we're going to look at the idea of being corrected. And when you're confronted, and when you're corrected, or when you have to correct, there's a value to it. And so this side of the coin, look diligently to your own business. Next week, look diligently to other people's business. And that, we'll deal with that one. All right? Let's open it up for questions or comments. Like I said, Proverbs is meant to be proverbial. It's meant to be a learning and a practical experience, very hands-on. But questions or comments as we close? David.
One thing that helps me with this area is the fact that sometimes we have paradigm shift. And what's helped me a lot is when I look at taking care of my own stuff, is when I recognize the fact that everything that I have belongs to God.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that because of that, we need to be good stewards of what God gives us. We need to take care of it.
Yep.
Because it's God's, not ours.
Yep.
So if you realize that fact, that the things that God's given me, they're not really mine, they belong to God. So I think most Christians have an ownership problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's my car, my house, my money, if you think about it, really, it all belongs to God. We're just temporary stewards
Yep.
of what God's given us. And when we realize that, I think we're more apt to be more diligent to take care of our flocks. When we recognize it belongs to God.
And I would hope so. But there is that old saying, drive it like you stole it. And I think some people approach life like that, where we should, when we understand that it is God's, we should treat it with the respect it deserves. But I think sometimes we drive it like I never have to give it back, and I'm just going to burn this thing out. And so, I see the wisdom. Yeah, I mean, because that's what the parables constantly remind us. You are a steward of what God has given you. It all came from God, and He can take it away at a moment's notice. It needs to be used for His glory. Dave?
Part of it, too, that helps me, too, with the covetous part, because we all struggle. The last commandment, they all fall under this, thou shalt not covet.
Yeah.
See, everything stems from coveting. A lot of
Yep.
That's one of the big struggles we all fight, battle with. And that is that we all care too much about what other people think about us. Or what, so what helps me sometimes is when I recognize the fact that we have an audience of one. We really shouldn't care what other people think about what we're doing. The only thing that we should care about is what does God think about us.
Yep.
And if
Yep.
we look at it from that perspective, that we have an audience of one, what does God think about this? That we don't care about other people. I used to have a really problem with, I thought my value was like what kind of car I drove. I tried to impress other people with our house. But really, if you think about it, we should be trying to impress other people. It should be, what does God think about us?
Mm-hmm.
That's our audience. We should be seeking to please the Lord, not other people.
Yeah.
When I got that really helped me to get over that, and the Lord's helping me in that area. Today I don't really care what kind of car I drive. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's it's like because I don't care what other people think. I'm getting to the point where I don't care what other people think about me. It's what does God think about me? That's really
Yeah.
the only thing that matters to me.
Yeah. And that's exactly the point Paul is making in Corinthians, where he said, We are not the type who compare amongst ourselves. You're not commended by how much you commend yourself. You're commended by how much God commends you. And that's exactly the principle of the audience of one. I think we have got to remember we're doing this all for God. He gives it to us all in the first place. He gives us the strength to live. He gives us the provision day by day. He gives us, again, Ecclesiastes is Solomon over and over saying, if God gives you the ability to enjoy it, celebrate. And so he's constantly pushing us back to say, look up to God. Look at him and look at what he's given and what he's provided. And thank you for that. The audience of one is that big thing. Because that audience of one is going to be the principle that says, I am going to have the ability to look to my own things and be content with what God's given me. But then the audience of one is where now when I do have to confront or when I have to receive confrontation, I know I answer to God and I can receive that correction or I can give that correction because I know I am answering to the one. And that's going to solve a lot of issues. And so thank you for that segue. That audience of one is going to be that good tie-in that brings together these two studies, because both are going to stem out of that same idea. Any other questions or comments tonight? Yeah. No, it's good. It's good. Mm. Yeah.
So we have to be careful while we put diligence to make sure the eternal thing is not temporary.
Yeah. So I know some people might be listening online. I don't know how much they can hear, but the idea of climbing the ladder to realize it's on the wrong wall. Again. But yeah. So. Any other questions or comments? All right. So Lord willing, next week we'll take the other side of this coin. And so this week, meditate on it. Look to the things God has put in your hands. Look to the things God has given you. Look at the place where God has put you. Are you living right in those areas? Okay? Now, the flip side. This is where we're going next week, Lord willing. We are all going to receive correction. We're all going to be confronted. We're all going to, and you know just as well as I do, there are some people who absolutely love to correct everyone around them. Sometimes they're helpful and sometimes they're not, okay? Sometimes they're well-meaning and it just comes at the wrong time. Sometimes they're not well-meaning and it comes also at the wrong time. We all know that. And so Lord willing, next week as we look to this other side, our natural tendency in our flesh is going to be to respond badly when we are corrected. But again, if we keep the idea of the audience of one in mind and we keep our mission in mind, I think that's going to solve a lot of those issues. Because like I said, there is a look to the state of your flocks. Well, sometimes that involves correction. Sometimes that involves turning them around and sending them in a new way. And so I wanted to look at these two topics back to back because I don't want to get unbalanced to the point that you become obsessed with yourself. Because that's not the point of tonight. It's just a creative title. All right? But next week, when we look at the idea of correction, I also don't want to spin the other way where now I'm saying, go out and be busybodies. No. It's